Okay, and I come back at this point to my three-legged stool diagram, because all of the issues that we dealt with as far as the defining and articulating and executing and formulating and implementing a strategy at the business unit level, all of those same issues also apply at the corporate level, right? Just as at the business unit level, we had to answer three questions. We had to answer the question of where do we compete, how do we compete, and how do we execute. The same thing applies here at the corporate level. We still have to answer those same three questions, except they're slightly different at the corporate level than they are at the business unit level. At the business unit level, you're looking in terms of where do we compete at what particular market, singular market, one market, what market are we competing in? Whereas here at the corporate level, we're talking not about a single market, but we're talking about the overall scope of businesses of the entire corporation. And you can think about that in terms of industries, products, markets, customers, geographic scope, etc. Okay. And whereas at the business unit level, we thought about resources and capabilities in terms of the particular resources and capabilities that you're bringing to bear to serve the needs of a particular market. Here at the corporate level, we're thinking about resources and capabilities being used across different markets, and how widely can they be applied across different markets becomes a very important question at the corporate level. Are these very generalized resources and capabilities that can be used across a very wide range of markets, or are they very specialized resources and capabilities that can only be applied to a very narrow range of markets? And another critical question there is, how are they applied? Not just can they be applied, or across what range of markets can they be applied, but how are they actually going to be applied? Are they going to be applied by having them be transferred from one business unit to another? Or are they going to be applied by having them be shared across different business units at the same time? Right? Transferring means they're only in one business unit at a given time. They move from one business unit to another, to another, to another. Sharing means they are held in common by all and used by all business units at the same time. So, as an example, just to make this a little bit more concrete, if your resources are the skills of a team of engineers, I'll give you a great example here. A company called Cooper Industries is a company that competes across a wide range of different sort of low-tech manufacturing businesses, right? And what they do, what Cooper Industries does, is they acquire companies that are in these low-tech manufacturing businesses, and they have a team of engineers that they call the Cooperizing team. And they go into these acquired manufacturing companies and just massively overhaul their operational efficiency and make them much more efficient. That team has tremendous expertise, but it is a team that is transferred into a business unit, one business unit at a time, right? So that's a transferring method of coordinating the resources and capabilities. A sharing method would be, for example, what Disney does. You know, when Disney invests in a animated film like The Lion King, they create a resource, that set of trademarks and copyrights and intellectual property around the characters of The Lion King and the storyline of The Lion King. And that is a resource that can be shared across a broad range of different business units simultaneously. It doesn't have to be transferred from one unit to the other. It can be shared and used simultaneously by many different business units, you know, from merchandising to theme parks to video, television, clothing, toys, games, etc. All of them can share that resource that Disney created at the same time. Okay. Finally, the third leg of the stool is execution. And again, the same sort of questions that we ask at the business unit level will apply at the corporate level, and that is, how do we align the people and the organization to get behind the strategy that we formulated in our answers to the first two questions, the where do we compete question and the how do we compete question. But at the corporate level, the critical issues in execution are around the size and role of the corporate office, for example. Is this a big corporate office that gets deeply involved in running individual business units, or is this a small corporate office that takes a more or less hands-off role in running the individual business units? Execution also focuses here on control systems. How does the corporate office keep tabs on the individual business units? Does it have control systems that are more financial in nature? Call us at the end of the quarter and let us know how things went. Give us the return on assets and return on equity and all that. Or are they more operational control systems where the corporate office gets involved in, more detailed information about how individual plants are being run or how, individual stores are being run, etc. Okay. And then a third element of execution is in terms of how the performance of the business units is being measured. What are the objectives? How do we think about performance? Are we thinking about performance only in terms of maximizing the profits of each individual business unit, or are we thinking about performance in terms of maximizing overall corporate profit? How do we measure the performance of these business units? Do we measure them only on their own performance, or do we measure them in terms of their contribution to the overall corporate performance? Which may be wind up giving you very different answers, because it can sometimes be the case that the best thing an individual business unit can do for the benefit of the overall corporation is to make a loss. And we'll talk about that more in a few moments.
Another element of implementing strategy at the corporate level is the issue of autonomy versus coordination. Most diversified firms, they tend to have fairly autonomous business units, and there's a fairly good reason for that.
And that is that if you have autonomous business units in a diversified firm, then your range of authority as a business unit manager is the same as your range of responsibility. You are not being held responsible for things that are outside your range of authority in that case, if you have autonomy. And that can be good in the sense that it provides for stronger incentive alignment if the things that you are being held responsible for are things that you can actually do something about. That leads to high motivation and high sense of ownership by people in the individual business units. However, there's a price that is paid for that high level of motivation and ownership, sense of ownership in autonomously run business units. That price is that when you have that much autonomy, it is difficult, if not impossible, to create the sort of coordination that is needed to achieve synergy at the corporate level. And as we've seen, companies that are more related diversifiers, that are more focused on gaining operational synergies, tend to be better performers than unrelated diversifiers. And so if the point of being successful diversification is to gain synergies, then autonomy would tend to be not the way to go. You would want to have the kind of coordination that is impossible under autonomy. And the point here is that if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 different divisions, and each is pursuing their own separate profit maximization without regard to what the other is doing, to what any of the others are doing, then adding up those maximum profits for the divisions may be less than the possible maximum profit that you could achieve corporate-wide. So, and by that I mean that there's a limit to the amount of coordination that can be achieved through self-interested cooperation. In order to be at that corporate level optimum, to maximize the overall corporate level profitability, it often requires some business unit or units within the company to sub-optimize. That is, not to maximize their profits, to make a sacrifice of their profits for the greater good of the overall corporate whole. And if that's the case, as is often true, that some business unit or units have to sacrifice their own profit in order for the overall corporate profit to be larger, then it's going to be difficult to achieve that maximum corporate level profit if you give full autonomy to the business units, because they are not going to be, they'll get part of the way there by having self-interested cooperation among the different business units, but they won't be able to get all of the way there. There will be unexploited market opportunities. There will be underused resources. There will be duplication of effort. Customers will perceive multiple contact points as being disorganized, right? Because if all of your different business units are being run autonomously, and let's say you've got 5 or 6 different business units, and all 5 or 6 of those different business units are selling to the same set of customers, Those customers may receive calls from salespeople from 5 or 6 different business units, different salespeople, and they'll perceive that redundancy as disorganization, especially if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. If, the salesperson from Division A doesn't know what's going on in Division B. Customers will perceive that as disorganization. Those are all of the costs of autonomy, but there are also costs to coordination. The costs are, again, if you have a mismatch between the range of authority and the range of responsibility, then that will tend to weaken incentives. There will be a loss of motivation, a loss of feeling of ownership, because you are holding business unit managers responsible for things that they are not fully in control of. They do not have the authority to change necessarily, and that can lead to a loss of motivation. Also, coordination requires a larger and more deeply involved corporate office, which can be expensive in its own right. And then, of course, there's the time and expense involved in coordinating different business units, the amount of compromise that goes on in terms of the settlement of disputes and negotiation between different business units, the complexity of having business units act in a coordinated manner rather than act in their own way, and the potential loss of flexibility because different business units are changing what they're doing to provide a better fit with other business units. That means if you have to change one business unit to do something different, then you may also have to change all the other different business units to do things differently as well. That may be more costly, so it may be more difficult to make those changes, and that implies a loss of flexibility. And finally, coordination is definitely difficult to impose under crisis conditions, which is often when companies seek to impose it, right? They get to a crisis point where they realize the way they've been running their different business units autonomously has been creating duplication of effort and redundant contact points with customers, and has left market opportunities unexploited and resources underused. And they decide, okay, well, we got to do something about this. We faced a crisis. We need to get greater coordination among our business units, and that's a really difficult thing to do under crisis conditions.